Hi there. Tonight, we step into the flickering glow of a medieval village, where the air smells of wood smoke and damp wool, and the clatter of cartwheels blends with a minstrel's lute drifting from a tavern. You're brushing past women in kirtles, their hands rough from spinning or milking, their whispers carrying secrets of love and longing under the church's watchful spire. This is a world where women's sexuality weaves through castles, cottages, and convents, tangled in faith, duty, and desire. Fair warning, you probably won't survive the muddy streets, the nosy priests, or the occasional whiff of an open latrine, without a sharp nose and sharper wits. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not just passing through, you're stepping into the lives of medieval women, from noble ladies to peasant wives, whose loves shaped their world as much as any king's decree. Sex and romance weren't private whispers here. They were bound by church, law, and the ever-present need for heirs. Yet women found ways to bend the rules. A mainstream fact sets the scene. By the 12th century, canon law across Europe required mutual consent for marriage, giving women, in theory, a say in their unions, though families often had the final word. You're dodging a merchant's cart, overhearing a young woman, let's call her Alina, argue with her father about a suitor. You'd probably trip in the muck trying to mediate, muttering about modern dating apps being easier, but Alina's fight shows love was a battlefield, even then. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women tucked lavender sprigs into their bodices, believing the scent could sway a lover's heart, or at least mask the day's chores. Picture Alina slipping one in, hoping it works, only to sneeze mid-flirt. You'd chuckle, imagining her explaining it as allergy season in 1150. Historians still argue whether this consent law empowered women or was a hollow gesture. Some say it gave leverage, especially for widows. Others think social pressures, like those on Cornelia in Rome, drowned out choice. You're not sure, but Alina's defiant stance suggests she's ready to wield whatever power she can grab. You pause by a market stall where women barter for wool, their laughter sharp as they trade tales of husbands and hopeful beaux. Love was public here. Courtly poets sang of noble ladies, while peasants like Alina swapped bawdy songs by the fire. The church loomed large, preaching chastity, yet taverns buzzed with flirty glances, not unlike Rome's Bacchanalia, though with more ale and fewer leopards. You spot a carved wooden cross on a vendor's neck, a nod to faith's grip, but her wink at a passing smith hints at desire's pull. The humour hits when a stray goat nibbles your hem, as if even livestock's judging your loitering. Women's sexuality was a dance, part sacred, part scandalous, shaped by the need to marry, birth, or prey, yet alive with human wants. The village darkens as torches flare, and you feel the weight of this world, where love was both a chain and a spark for women, from Alina to queens. You're starting to see their lives as a tapestry, woven with duty, defiance and dreams, much like those Roman lovers' statues. The church bell tolls, a reminder of tomorrow's prayers, and you linger by the stall, wondering how Alina will navigate her heart's path and what secrets medieval women hid in the shadows of their flickering, firelit lives. You're standing in the chilly nave of a stone church, the air heavy with wax and incense, the flicker of votive candles casting shadows on saints' faces painted on the walls. The creak of a wooden pew and a monk's low chant echo, and you're brushing past women kneeling, their wimples framing faces etched with hope or worry. You're not here for Sunday Mass. You're uncovering the Church's iron grip on women's sexuality in medieval times, where every kiss or caress was weighed against divine law. The village's hum feels muffled beyond the thick walls, and you're trying not to trip over a prayer stool while you soak in this sacred control, hoping you don't sneeze and disrupt the hush. The medieval church wasn't just a place of worship. It shaped women's bodies and desires with rules as firm as castle gates. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 13th century, the Fourth Lateran Council mandated annual confession, forcing women to disclose their sexual sins, from stray thoughts to secret trysts, to priests who judged and assigned penance. You're imagining Alina, our market girl, whispering her crush on a blacksmith to a stern cleric, her cheeks burning. You'd probably stammer your own confession, tripping over Latin like a bad script. But this ritual wasn't just soul cleansing, it was control, tying women's love to God's watchful eye. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some priests gave out love penances, like fasting on bread and water, to curb lust, but rumor had it certain herbs in the broth could spark it instead. Picture Alina sipping her penance soup, wondering why she's daydreaming more, not less. You'd chuckle, imagining her blaming the cook for bad theology. Historians still argue whether the Church's rules stifled women or gave them leverage. Some say confession let women voice desires like Flavia's Roman market clout. Others think it shamed them into silence, unlike Rome's bacchanalia freedom. You're not sure, but Alina's fidgeting hands suggest she's wrestling with more than prayer. You move toward a side chapel, where a statue of the Virgin Mary looms, her serene face a model of chastity every woman was meant to chase. Women, like Alina, left offerings, flowers, candles, praying for purity or forgiveness, their whispers echoing Venus's Roman wine pours, but stricter, colder. The humor hits when you overhear a young wife mutter about her husband's unholy snoring, slipping it into her confession like a bonus sin. The Church preached sex was for procreation, not pleasure, yet priests knew human nature. Sermons warned against excessive ardor, even in marriage. You notice a worn prayer book, its pages dog-eared at passages on modesty, a reminder of the rules binding Alina's heart. The nave grows quieter as Vespers begin, and you feel the Church's weight, its ability to shape women's love into a narrow path of virtue or sin. You're starting to see how Alina navigates this, her desires caught between the blacksmith's grin and Mary's marble gaze, not unlike Sabina's Roman divorce defiance, but with more guilt. The candles flicker, casting a glow like the village fires, and you slip toward the door, wondering how women balance their hearts under heaven's scrutiny and what secrets they hid in the sacred shadows of medieval faith. You're slipping through the heavy oak doors of a noblewoman's solar, the air warm with the scent of beeswax candles and lavender strewn on the rush-strewn floor. Tapestries of unicorns and knights flutter in the draught, and a lute's soft pluck drifts from a corner where a lady's maid hums. You're not here for a courtly ballad. You're peeking into the intimate lives of aristocratic women in medieval times where sex and love were bound by rank, duty, and the ever-present need for alliances. The castle's distant clamor feels muted, and you're trying not to trip on a velvet cushion while you explore these private chambers, hoping you don't knock over a silver goblet. For noble women, the bedroom was a stage for politics as much as passion, with every act scrutinized for its impact on lineage. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 12th century, noble marriages, as recorded in chronicles like those of Orderic Vitalis, were arranged to secure land or peace, with women expected to produce heirs to cement dynasties. You're imagining a lady like Eleanor, her silk kirtle rustling as she navigates her marriage bed with a lord chosen by her father. You'd probably snag your sleeve on a candelabra trying to eavesdrop, muttering about needing a flowchart for feudal politics. But Eleanor's role is clear. Her body is a contract, signed in vows and sealed with a son. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some noblewomen wore embroidered girdles with tiny bells, believed to signal fertility or ward off barrenness, jingling softly in private moments. Picture Eleanor adjusting hers, only for a bell to fall off mid-embrace. Awkward. You'd chuckle, imagining her lord's confusion, like a cat chasing a runaway toy. Historians still argue whether these marriages allowed affection or were purely strategic, unlike Alina's village flirtations. Some point to letters between nobles hinting at love. Others say duty, like Rome's patrician beds trumped feeling. You're not sure, but Eleanor's poised gaze suggests she's playing a long game, heart or no heart. You notice her bed, a curtained fortress of linen and furs, carved with roses, symbolizing Venus's medieval echo, less bold than Rome's. Frescoes, but still potent. The humor hits when you spot a small, wooden saint's figure on a table, glaring at the bed like a chaperone who never blinks. Eleanor's intimacy was regulated. Church rules, like those confessions we overheard, demanded sex for heirs, not joy, yet she might wield influence, choosing when to conceive, perhaps with herbs we'll mix later. You recall the church's grip, its sermons shaping even these castle walls. But Eleanor's quiet command, like Flavia's Roman market sway, hints at power behind the silk. The solar's glow softens as a maid stokes the fire, and you realize these chambers were battlegrounds where women like Eleanor balanced love, duty, and survival, not unlike Sabina's Roman divorce. You're starting to feel the weight of her role, her heart caught between a lord's embrace and a dynasty's demands. The lute fades, leaving only the crackle of flames, and you slip toward a window, the village's torchlight faint below, wondering what secrets Eleanor keeps in her gilded cage, and how she navigates desire when every touch is a move in the Game of Thrones. You're crouched in a dim corner of a village wise woman's hut, the air thick with the scent of drying herbs and a smoky hearth where a pot simmers with something suspiciously green. Rushlights flicker, casting jittery shadows on walls hung with bundles of thyme and bones you hope are just chicken. You're not here for a cough remedy. You're diving into the secretive world of medieval love charms, where women crafted spells to spark passion or douse unwanted suitors. The village's nighttime hum seeps through the wattle walls, and you're trying not to knock over a clay jar while you test these enchantments, praying you don't accidentally curse your own love life. Medieval women, from peasants to nobles, turned to magic when love needed a nudge, blending faith with forbidden law. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, church records, like those from the Diocese of York, show women fined for using love philters, potions meant to bind hearts, often made with herbs like vervain or menstrual blood. You're imagining Alina, our market flirt, stirring a brew to win her blacksmith, her hands trembling with hope and fear of the priest's wrath. You'd probably spill the potion, muttering about needing a recipe app, but this was serious love. Spells could land you in a penance like those church confessions, or worse, a witch's pyre. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women tied a lover's hair to a mandrake root, buried under a full moon, believing it would make him dream of her nightly. Picture Alina sneaking out, digging in the dark, only to yank up a turnip by mistake. You chuckle, imagining her cursing her bad aim like missing a Tinder swipe. Historians still argue whether these charms were acts of agency or desperation. Some say they gave women control, like Eleanor's noble bed strategies. Others think they were last resorts in a world of arranged marriages, unlike Rome's curse. Tablets, you're not sure, but Alina's whispered chant over the pot suggests she's betting her heart on magic. You pick up a small pouch of rose petals and honey, a gentler charm to soften a man's will, the wise woman's voice low as she lists ingredients. None of that crocodile dung from Egypt, thank goodness. The humor hits when she warns you not to use too much honey, lest the suitor gets sticky in all the wrong ways. These spells weren't just for love. Some, like a nettle brew, repelled creeps, giving women a shield in a world of pushy lords or neighbors. You recall the church's grip, its sermons damning such sorcery. Yet here, women like Alina carve space for desire, echoing Flavia's Roman market power, but with more risk. You notice a carved Mary figurine by the hearth, a nod to faith's uneasy truce with magic. The hut's glow dims as the rushlight sputters, and you realize these charms were women's quiet rebellion, a way to steer love when society chained it, unlike the Bacchanalia's open revels. You're starting to feel Alina's daring, her need to bend fate when a blacksmith's smile isn't enough. The village's silence wraps around you, broken only by the pot's bubble, and you set the pouch down, wondering if her spell will work, or if it's just a flicker of hope in the medieval dark, where women's hearts burned brighter than any priest's candle. You're settled on a straw-stuffed bench in a peasant's timber-framed cottage, the air thick with the scent of simmering pottage and the tang of wool from a spinning wheel humming nearby. The fire crackles, casting a warm glow on mud-plastered walls, and you're catching the soft banter of a couple as they mend a fishing net together. You're not here to borrow a ladle. You're navigating the practical, earthy world of peasant marriage bonds, where medieval women like Alina forged partnerships rooted in survival, labor, and quiet affection. The village's nighttime hush seeps through the shuttered window, and you're trying not to snag your sleeve on a splinter while you soak in their daily rhythm, hoping you don't look too out of place in this cozy chaos. For peasant women, marriage was less about romance and more about teamwork, though love often bloomed in the margins. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 13th century, manorial court roles like those from Ramsay Abbey show peasant marriages required lordly consent and a fee, but women could negotiate dowries, often just a cow or a few tools, to secure their stake. You're picturing Alina, now betrothed to her blacksmith, haggling with her lord over a piglet as her dowry, her voice steady despite the stakes. You'd probably trip over a stray hen trying to back her up, muttering about needing a medieval lawyer, but Alina's grit shows marriage was a contract, not a fairy tale, unlike Eleanor's noble alliances. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasant couples sealed their vows by sharing a love loaf, a bread baked with barley, and a pinch of salt, believed to bind their fates. Imagine Alina and her blacksmith breaking it, crumbs flying as he grins at her. You'd chuckle, picturing the mess like a clumsy wedding cake smash, but this ritual was sacred, a nod to survival's shared burden. Historians still argue whether these marriages offered equality or reinforced male control, unlike Rome's plebeian vows. Some say women's labor, spinning, brewing, gave leverage. Others think lords and husbands held the reins, like the church's confession rules. You're not sure, but Alina's teasing jab at her man's knot-tying skills suggests she's no silent partner. You glance around the cottage where a kettle steams and a cradle rocks gently, hinting at the children expected soon. Marriage meant sex, not for pleasure. per those church sermons we overheard, but for heirs and help in the fields. The humour hits when you spot a carved wooden spoon on the hearth, etched with a heart, probably a courtship gift gone wonky in the carving. Alina's life, like Livia's Roman bread vows, revolves around work, but you see her steal a glance at her blacksmith, a spark not unlike Flavia's market flirtations, though humbler. Sex was practical, often rushed between chores, yet the couple's laughter hints at joy in stolen moments, far from the church's grim warnings or Eleanor's silk-draped duties. The fire dims, casting long shadows, and you realize these peasant bonds were lifelines, weaving women like Alina into the village's pulse, unlike Rome's bacchanalia excess. You're starting to admire her balance, her way of blending duty with a blacksmith's warm grin, even under a lord's thumb. The cottage grows quiet, save for the wheel's hum, and you lean back, wondering how Alina keeps her heart kindled in this hard-scrabble world, and what it takes to love when life's as tough as the frost creeping through the medieval night. You're standing in the flickering glow of a lord's great hall, the air rich with the scent of beeswax and damp wool from tapestries hanging heavy on stone walls. A fire roars, casting shadows that dance across woven scenes of hunts and lovers, their threads glinting like secrets. You're not here to warm your hands. You're decoding the tapestries of intimacy, where medieval women's desires are stitched into art, subtle but bold, hinting at passions the church might frown upon. The village's nighttime hush feels far beyond the hall's thick doors, and you're trying not to trip on a rush-strewn floor while you unravel these woven stories, hoping you don't snag a thread and unravel history itself. Tapestries weren't just decor in medieval Europe. They were canvases where women's hands and hearts left traces of love's quiet rebellion. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, noble households, as noted in inventories like those of the French court, displayed tapestries depicting courtly love, knights kneeling to ladies, gardens blooming with roses, often woven by women or under their patronage. You're tracing a scene of a lady offering a garland to a knight, their eyes locked in a way that feels too real for allegory. You probably blush, feeling like you've crashed their moment, muttering about needing a medieval rom-com. But these images, unlike Rome's explicit frescoes, veiled desire in chivalry, echoing Eleanor's noble bed. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tapestries hid tiny hairs in the borders, symbols of lust, a cheeky nod to what the roses really meant. Picture spotting one, its ears peeking from a vine and stifling a giggle at the weaver's nerve. You'd chuckle, imagining Alina sneaking one into her own sewing, like graffiti on a Roman wall. Historians still argue whether these tapestries were romantic ideals or subversive hints at women's agency. Some say they glorified male devotion, like the church's Mary statues. Others think women like Flavia used them to voice desires, unlike the church's confession constraints. You're not sure, but the hare's sly grin suggests a weaver with Alina's market spark. You move to another tapestry, where a lady plays a lute in a walled garden, a knight leaning close, his hand brushing hers. The humor hits when you notice a tiny dog at their feet, yapping at a misplaced stitch, as if even it's annoyed by the tension. These scenes weren't just noble fantasies. Peasant women like Alina saw simpler versions in village churches, their embroidery echoing the great hall's themes, though with coarser thread. You recall those love charms we mixed, their secrecy mirrored here in woven roses, a safer rebellion than Alina's moonlit mandrake. The tapestries feel alive, like Licinia's Roman dance, but quieter, speaking to women from Eleanor's solar to village looms. The hall's fire crackles, and you realize these tapestries were medieval women's whispers, threading desire into a world of duty, unlike Rome's bacchanalia boldness. You're starting to feel their craft, the way each stitch held a dream, much like Sabina's Romana, divorce defiance, or Drusilla's Subura grit. The shadows deepen, broken only by a servant's soft step, and you linger, wondering what other passions these threads conceal, and how women wove their hearts into art when the church's gaze and village gossip weighed heavy as the wool in their hands. You're hunched over a worn table in a village midwife's cottage, the air thick with the scent of dried chamomile and the sharp tang of vinegar steaming from a clay pot. Rushlights cast a dim glow on shelves cluttered with jars of seeds, roots, and murky liquids, their labels smudged from years of use. You're not here for a sprained ankle. You're mixing medieval women's hidden tricks for contraception, secret brews to keep babies at bay in a world where motherhood was expected, but not always wanted. The village's nighttime hush wraps around the wattle walls, and you're trying not to spill a gritty paste while you explore these clandestine remedies, hoping you don't end up with a potion stuck to your fingers. Contraception in medieval times was a risky, whispered art practiced by women like Alina to control their futures despite the church's watchful eye. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 13th century, medical texts like the Trotula, attributed to a female physician, listed herbal pessaries, mixtures of rue, pennyroyal, or juniper, to prevent conception, often used by women in secret. You're stirring a paste of ground rue and honey, the recipe's bitter smell making your nose wrinkle, imagining Alina preparing it after her blacksmith's visit. You'd probably sneeze mid-mix, scattering herbs like a bad alchemist. But this was no game. The church, with its confession mandates we heard, condemned such acts as sinful, and discovery could mean penance or worse. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women wore amulets stuffed with weasel bones, believed to block pregnancy because weasels, supposedly, birthed through their ears. Picture Alina tying one on, giggling at the absurdity, only to hope it works anyway. You'd chuckle, imagining explaining this to a modern pharmacist, like swapping birth control for a pet skeleton. Historians still argue whether these methods were effective or folklore, unlike Rome's Silphium brews. Some say herbs like pennyroyal disrupted fertility. Others think amulets were pure superstition, a desperate echo of Eleanor's noble girdle bells. You're not sure, but Alina's careful stirring suggests she's not leaving her fate to chance. You glance at another jar, filled with a vinegar-soaked wool plug, a barrier method the midwife swears by, though it smells like a pickling mishap. The humor hits when you imagine Alina's blacksmith sniffing it and bolting, love loaf forgotten. These remedies were women's domain, shared in hushed tones by midwives or neighbors, far from the church's sermons or the tapestry's rosy ideals we saw. You recall those love charms, their mandrake roots, a bolder magic. Here, it's practical, giving women like Alina or even Eleanor a shield against endless births, unlike Rome's Subura trades. The midwife's voice, low and steady, warns of the risks. Herbs could sicken, and priests sniffed out secrets like hounds. The cottage's glow dims as a rushlight gutters, and you realize contraception was a quiet act of defiance, letting women, like Alina, steer their lives in a world demanding heirs, unlike Bacchanalia's reckless joy. You're starting to admire her courage, mixing rue under the church's nose, her heart tied to her blacksmith, but her future her own. The hearth's crackle softens, and you set the jar down, wondering how many women whispered these recipes in moonlit huts, and what it cost to hold such power when the medieval world, from village to castle, watched every step with judgmental eyes. You're kneeling in the damp chill of a village chapel, the air heavy with the scent of mouldy straw, and the sweet smoke of beeswax candles guttering before a painted wooden shrine. The creak of a door and a child's cough echo off stone walls, and you're surrounded by women clutching rosaries, their faces lit by flickering flames as they murmur prayers. You're not here for a quick blessing, you're meeting the holy saints who guarded medieval women's fertility, divine figures who shaped the hope and fear of motherhood in a world where babies were both a gift and a gamble. The village's nighttime hush feels close beyond the chapel's narrow windows, and you're trying not to knock over a candle while you soak in this sacred space, hoping you don't sneeze and ruin the reverence. Fertility was a divine matter for medieval women, tying their bodies to heaven's will and the village's survival. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, hagiographies like those in the Golden Legend describe women praying to saints like St. Margaret or St. Anne for safe pregnancies, with shrines drawing pilgrims seeking conception or healthy births. You're picturing Alina, now married to her blacksmith, offering a wax figurine of a baby to St. Anne's altar, her hands trembling with hope. You'd probably drop the figurine, muttering about slippery wax, but this was no small prayer. Childbirth was perilous, and saints were women's allies, unlike the Church's stern confession rules we overheard. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women tied ribbons soaked in holy water to their waists, believing St. Margaret's blessing would ease labor pains. As her legend claimed, she escaped a dragon's belly. Picture Alina knotting hers, half laughing at the dragon tail, but tying it tight anyway. You'd chuckle, imagining it's like wearing a lucky charm for a marathon, but with more miracles. Historians still argue whether these rituals empowered women or reinforced their role as mothers, unlike Rome's Ceres worship. Some say saints gave hope, like Eleanor's noble prayers. Others think they trapped women in endless childbearing, unlike Alina's rue paste. You're not sure, but Alina's focused gaze suggests she's banking on St. Anne's grace. You move closer to the shrine, where a crude carving of St. Margaret stands, her foot on a dragon, surrounded by offerings. Ribbons, coins, even a tiny shoe. The humor hits when you overhear a woman pray for a son, less stubborn than his father, slipping a cheeky wish into her devotion, not unlike Paula's Roman taberna banter. These saints weren't distant, they were confidants, like the midwives we met but divine, bridging the Church's grip and women's needs. You recall those tapestries' hairs, hinting at lust, here desires channeled into motherhood, yet the ribbons echo Flavia's Roman perfume tricks, a softer seduction. Women like Alina or Eleanor leaned on saints to navigate the dangers of birth, their prayers a shield in a world of fragile lives. The chapel's silence deepens, broken only by a whispered Ave Maria, and you realize these saints were medieval, women's anchors, guiding them through fertility's hopes, unlike Rome's Bacchanalia revels. You're starting to feel Alina's trust, her heart split between her blacksmith's love and the fear of labor's risks, much like Sabina's Roman divorce courage. The candle's glow softens and you step back, wondering how these saints shaped women's bedrooms and dreams, and what it meant to seek divine help when the medieval world hung motherhood's weight on every woman's shoulders. You're weaving through a bustling market square, the air alive with the scent of fresh-baked rye and the tang of wet wool from a dyer's stall nearby. Women in kirtles haggle over turnips, their voices sharp and confident, their hands gesturing, with a grace that turns heads. You're not here to buy a basket of eggs, you're uncovering the quiet power medieval women wielded in the delicate dance of love and sex, where influence bloomed in whispers, glances, and clever maneuvers. The village's hum pulses around you, and you're trying not to trip over a stray goose while you track these subtle forces, hoping you don't look too obvious gawking at their skill. Medieval women, despite the church's heavy hand, found ways to shape their romantic lives from villages to castles. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 13th century, court records, like those from the English manor of Wakefield, show women could inherit or manage property as widows, giving them leverage in remarriage or courtship, a power not unlike Eleanor's. Noble negotiations. You're picturing a widow like Marjorie, her wimple crisp, charming a new suitor with tales of her thriving barley field. You'd probably fumble your own pitch, dropping a turnip mid-sentence, but Marjorie's poise, like Flavia's Roman market swagger, shows women could steer love's course, even in a man's world. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women slipped love knots, braided cords, into suitors' pockets, a silent signal of interest believed to bind hearts, much like Alina's lavender sprigs. Imagine Marjorie tucking one in, only for it to fall out during a hearty handshake. You'd chuckle, picturing it like a medieval text message gone rogue. Historians still argue whether this power was real or constrained, unlike Rome's bacchanalia. Freedoms. Some say property rights gave women clout, like Alina's dowry piglet. Others think social norms, like the church's confession rules, kept them tethered. You're not sure, but Marjorie's sly smile as she haggles suggests she's got more sway than the manor rolls admit. You pause by a weaver's stall, where Marjorie trades gossip with a friend, her words laced with hints about a suitor's wealth, or lack thereof. The humour hits when she mocks his fancy hose that sag at the knees, a jab sharp enough to rival Marcia's Roman rumours. Women like Marjorie weren't just wives or mothers, they were matchmakers, advisors, even poets in their own right, shaping village romances like Eleanor did in her Solar. You recall the tapestry's hairs, their lustful wink, here powers subtler, woven into market chats or St. Anne's shrine prayers, a grounded echo of Drusilla's Subura hustle. Marjorie's friend slips her a ribbon, maybe a charm, tying their talk to Alina's love potions. The market's din softens as clouds roll in, the village's rhythm a steady heartbeat. You realize women's power was a quiet current, flowing through love's negotiations despite the church's grip or lord's decrees, unlike Rome's public toga signals. You're starting to admire Marjorie's finesse, her ability to bend fate with a love knot or a well-timed jest, much like Sabina's divorce defiance. The square empties, save for a stray dog's yap, and you linger, wondering how Marjorie plays her hand in this muddy, vibrant world and what it takes to wield love's power when every step is watched by neighbours and saints alike. You're lounging in the smoky warmth of a village tavern, the air thick with the scent of ale-soaked wood and the faint whiff of roasting mutton from a spit turning over the hearth. Men, ploughmen, millers, and a grizzled farrier swap tales. Over clay mugs, their laughter rough but warm, like the fire's crackle. You're not here to sample the brew. You're peeling back the pressures medieval men faced as husbands, where their roles in love and sex carried expectations heavier than a harvest load. The village's nighttime hush seeps through the shuttered windows, and you're trying not to knock over a wobbly stool while you soak in their world, hoping you don't get roped into a drinking contest you'd lose. Medieval men, from peasants to lords, were expected to lead their households, with bedroom duties tied to family and faith. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 13th century, church teachings like those in Thomas Aquinas' writings emphasized men's responsibility to render the marital debt, sex within marriage, to satisfy their wives and avoid sin, a rule enforced through confessions we overheard. You're picturing Alina's blacksmith, let's call him Thomas, sweating not just from his forge, but from the pressure to keep Alina content while siring heirs for their cottage. You'd probably fumble a reassuring pat, tripping over a stray mug, but Thomas's role is clear. His manhood hinges on performance, not unlike Quintus's Roman toga swagger. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some men wore rings carved with St. Joseph, Mary's husband, believing his patience boosted their endurance in marital duties. Imagine Thomas slipping one on, praying it works, only to lose it in the forge's ash. You'd chuckle, picturing him fishing it out like a medieval multi-tool. Gone rogue. Historians still argue whether these expectations burdened men or gave them power, unlike Rome's bachelor laws. Some say the church's rules made men providers, like Marcus's bread vows. Others think they sparked anxiety, with failure fueling gossip like Marcia's. You're not sure, but Thomas's quick glance at his mug suggests he's feeling the heat. You watch a young man, maybe a carter, boast about his new bride, his voice loud but his eyes nervous, like Publius reciting Ovid in Rome. The humor hits when an older drinker teases him about keeping the fire lit, earning a blush and a spilled ale. Men had to initiate courtship, think Alina's love loaf, provide for families, and satisfy the church's procreation mandate, much like Eleanor's lordly heirs. Failure, like a barren bed, drew whispers, not unlike the market's love knots Marjorie wielded. You notice a small cross on the tavern wall, a nod to the church's grip, echoing St. Anne's shrine, but sterner, reminding Thomas his love's under divine audit. The tavern's glow dims as the fire settles, and you realize these expectations weren't just personal. They anchored the village's order, tying men to the land's rhythm, unlike Rome's bacchanalia revels. You're starting to feel Thomas's weight, his heart split between Alina's smile and the need to prove his worth, much like Gaius's Roman love curse. The mugs clink softer now, and you lean back, wondering how Thomas keeps his spark alive under the church's gaze and the village's eyes, and what it takes to be a man when love's as much a duty as ploughing fields in the medieval dawn. You're swept into the vibrant whirl of a village festival, the air buzzing with the scent of spiced ale and fresh straw strewn underfoot, mingling with the smoky tang of roasting chestnuts. Torches flare along the green, their light dancing. On women in bright kirtles, their laughter sharp as fiddles wail and drums thump. You're not just a bystander, you're joining the flirtations of a medieval feast, where women's desires spark under the guise of harvest revels, free from the church's heavy stare. The village's nighttime pulse pounds around you, and you're trying not to trip over a hay bale while you dive into this joyful chaos, hoping you don't spill your mug of cider on someone's best cloak. Festivals like Michaelmas or May Day were rare moments when medieval women could let their hair down, their flirtations weaving through dances and games. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, church records like those from the Diocese of Exeter note festivals as times of mirth and marriage-making, where women could court openly, often leading to betrothals. You're watching Alina, now glowing with her blacksmith Thomas by her side, twirl in a circle dance, her eyes catching a neighbour's son for a playful glance. You'd probably step on your own hem trying to join in, muttering about needing a medieval dance tutorial, but this was a stage where women like Alina shone, unlike Eleanor's guarded solar. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women pinned apple, slices to their skirts, a charm to draw suitors, believing the fruit's sweetness mirrored their own. Picture Alina tucking one on, only for it to fall into the mud mid-spin. You'd chuckle, imagining her cursing like a dropped love knot in Marjorie's market. Historians still argue whether these festivals were true freedom or controlled outlets, unlike Rome's Bacchanalia excess. Some say they let women like Alina flirt with agency. Others think the church tolerated them to curb worse sins, like those love philters we mixed. You're not sure, but Alina's bold laugh suggests she's making the most of this torchlit night. You weave through the crowd, past a bonfire where a juggler tosses flaming brands, and spot women tossing ribbons to partners, a game echoing Licinia's Roman banquet dance, but earthier with more ale. The humour hits when a tipsy lad catches one, only to tangle it in his beard, drawing hoots from the crowd. These moments let women shed their roles, wife, widow, maid, like Marjorie's market power or Alina's rue-paced secrecy, and embrace desire openly, far from the church's St. Anne's shrine or confession stool. Even noble women like Eleanor might have joined manor feasts, their flirtations veiled in courtly games, but here it's raw, like Flavia's Roman market wit without the gold. The fiddle's slow, and the fire's glow catches the village's spire, a reminder of the church's shadow even in revelry. You realize these festivals were women's fleeting chance to spark love on their terms, a burst of life in a world of plough and prayer, unlike Rome's Subura trades. You're starting to feel Alina's joy, her heart racing as she dances with Thomas, her glance daring the night to judge, much like Sabina's Roman divorce nerve. The crowd thins, and you linger, cider warm in your hand, wondering what other desires bloomed under these torches, and how women carried their festival sparks into the medieval dawn. You're skulking through the moonlit lanes of a medieval village, the air sharp with the scent of damp thatch and the faint whiff of livestock tucked in for the night. Owls hoot, and the crunch of your steps on gravel feels too loud, like you're announcing your presence to every snooping neighbor. You're not out for a midnight stroll. You're dodging the dire stakes of adultery, where forbidden love for medieval women could unravel lives faster than a dropped spindle. The village's silence presses around you, and you're trying not to trip over a stray root while you navigate this perilous game, hoping you don't wake a dog and spark a village scandal. Adultery was a grave sin and crime in medieval Europe, with women facing harsher judgment than men under the church's watchful gaze. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 13th century, ecclesiastical court records like those from Canterbury show women caught in affairs risked public penance, wearing sackcloth or standing in church, or even banishment, while men often paid fines. You're imagining a weaver like Cecily, heart pounding as she sneaks to meet a merchant, her kirtle catching on thorns. You'd probably snag your cloak trying to follow, muttering about needing a medieval GPS. But Cecily's risk is real. Discovery could cost her home, honor, or worse, unlike Alina's festival flirtations. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some lovers used coded signals like a sprig of rosemary tucked in a window to arrange secret meetings, a trick as subtle as Marjorie's love knots. Picture Cecily placing one only for a wind to blow it into the mud, ruining her plan. You'd chuckle, thinking it's like a text message lost to bad Wi-Fi, but the stakes were no joke. Historians still argue whether these punishments were enforced evenly or spared elites, unlike Rome's Lex Julia. Some say noble women like Eleanor dodged disgrace with influence. Others point to village records showing even peasants faced the whip. You're not sure, but Cecily's quick glances suggest she's not counting on mercy. You pause by a darkened cottage, catching a whisper from behind a shutter. Maybe Cecily arguing with her lover about their next step. The humor hits when you imagine their panic if a rooster crows early, turning their tryst into a village wake-up call, not unlike Marcia's Roman gossip woes. Adultery threatened families and land, especially for women, whose honor, like Cornelia's, Roman virginity was a fragile shield. Men, like Thomas the blacksmith, might face scorn but kept their status, a double standard echoing Rome's Subura. You recall the Church's grip, its St. Anne prayers for purity. Hear that faith turns vengeful, with priests sniffing out sin like hounds, unlike the Bacchanalia's wild leniency. The lane grows still, the village's spire a dark silhouette against the stars, and you realize adultery was a crack in the medieval order, where women's desire defied the Church's chains, much like Sabina's Roman divorce. You're starting to feel Cecily's thrill and terror, her heart torn between
love and ruin, a far cry from Alina's apple-pinned dance.
The night's chill wraps around you and you slip away, wondering how many women braved these shadows for a stolen kiss, and what price they paid when the medieval dawn exposed their secrets to a world of wagging tongues and holy wrath. You're lingering in the quiet cloister of a medieval convent, the air cool with the scent of damp stone and crushed lavender from a nearby herb garden. The soft shuffle of nuns' sandals and the murmur of Latin prayers echo off the arches, and you're catching fleeting glances between two women, their wimples framing faces that betray a warmth beyond sisterly devotion. You're not here to join the Vespers, you're tracing the faint whispers of same-sex bonds among medieval women, loves that flickered in the margins of a world ruled by church and husband. The village's distant hum feels muted, and you're trying not to trip on a loose flagstone while you piece together these hidden stories, hoping you don't draw the prioress's stern gaze. Same-sex love among women in medieval Europe was rarely recorded, veiled in silence or coded language, yet it existed in convents, courts, and villages. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 12th century, texts like the letters of Hildegard of Bingen show intense emotional bonds between women in religious life, often described in spiritual terms, but hinting at deeper affection. You're imagining a young nun like Beatrice, her quill pausing as she writes a poem for her beloved sister Agnes, their hands brushing in the scriptorium. You'd probably knock over an inkpot trying to peek, muttering about needing a medieval decoder ring. But their bond, like Rome's bathhouse glances, suggests love beyond the Church's script. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women exchanged woven bracelets threaded with their own hair as tokens of devotion, a secret charm hidden under wimples, much like Alina's love loaf. Picture Beatrice slipping one to Agnes, blushing when it snags on her sleeve. You'd chuckle, thinking it's like passing a note in class, but with more psalms. Historians still argue whether these bonds were romantic or purely spiritual. Unlike Rome's explicit male loves, some say convents offered safe spaces for love, like Eleanor's solar intrigues. Others think the Church recast passion as piety, stifling it like Cecily's adultery risks. You're not sure, but Beatrice's shy smile suggests her heart's not just praying. You move past a fresco of St. Catherine, her serene face a stark contrast to the human warmth here, echoing the Virgin Mary's chapel statue, but less cold. The humor hits when you overhear a nun tease another about too many candlelit prayers with Agnes, a jab as sharp as Marjorie's market gossip. These loves weren't flaunted. Convents, like Rome's bathhouses, were private, but they thrived in shared chores or late-night vigils, far from the festival's apple-pinned dances. You recall the tapestry's hairs, their lustful wink. Here, desires quieter, woven into poems or glances, a defiance softer than Alina's rue paste, but no less brave. The cloister's silence deepens, broken only by a bell for Compline, and you realize these bonds were medieval women's secret light, glowing against the Church's heavy rules, unlike Rome's Bacchanalia revels. You're starting to feel Beatrice's courage, her love for Agnes, a fragile spark in a world of Vows and veils, much like Sabina's Roman divorce nerve. The lavender's scent lingers, and you slip toward the garden, wondering how many such loves hid in plain sight, and what it meant to hold a heart close when the medieval world, from village to convent, demanded women's love bend to God or man alone. You're picking your way through the muddy outskirts of a medieval town, where the air reeks of tannery vats and the faint tang of sour ale wafting from a crooked alehouse. Torches sputter along ramshackle walls, casting shadows on women lingering. In alleyways, their kirtles frayed, but faces bold, trading sharp words with passers-by. You're not here for a late-night errand. You're stepping into the harsh world of prostitution, where medieval women survived on society's fringes, their bodies a currency in a world that judged them for it. The village's hum fades behind, the clatter of a cart, and you're trying not to slip in the muck while you explore this gritty reality, hoping you don't get mistaken for a nosy stranger. Prostitution was a stark fact of medieval life, tolerated but scorned, woven into towns, underbellies from Rome's Subura to this muddy lane. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, municipal records like those from London's Southwark show regulated brothels where women paid fees to work under civic oversight, often near churches or markets. You're picturing a woman, like Joan, her cloak patched, bantering with a merchant for a quick coin, her wit as sharp as Marjorie's market charm. You'd probably trip over a broken cobble trying to ask her name, earning a raised brow, but Joan's hustle is no game. She's a survivor, her life shaped by need. Unlike Alina's festival dances or Eleanor's solar. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some prostitutes wore yellow hoods, a church-mandated mark to set them apart, though they'd often dye them bright to mock the rule, a defiant flash like Drusilla's Roman sandal prints. Picture Joan sporting a saffron scarf, twirling it to draw eyes. You chuckle, imagining it's like flipping off a dress code with neon flair. Historians still argue whether prostitution gave women agency or trapped them, unlike Rome's lupi. Some say earnings offered independence, like Marjorie's widow clout. Others point to stigma and violence, worse than Cecily's adultery risks. You're not sure, but Joan's steady gaze suggests she's carving out power where she can. You pause by a sagging brothel, its door painted with a crude rose, a nod to Venus's medieval shadow, far less grand than Rome's frescoes, but no less potent. The humour hits when you overhear Joan quip about a client's nightly stamina, or lack thereof, her laugh echoing Flavia's Roman market jabs. Her work wasn't just physical, it was charm, negotiation, even solace for lonelier men, much like Beatrice's convent whispers, but raw. Some women worked festivals like Alina's apple-pinned revels, blending into the crowd until dawn. You notice a worn St. Mary Magdalene pendant around Joan's neck, a plea for redemption, like St. Anne's shrine prayers, tying her trade to the church's uneasy mercy. The alley's din softens as a drizzle starts, the village's spire looming in the mist. You realize prostitution was a mirror of medieval women's limits and resilience, a life where love was sold but survival won, unlike Rome's bacchanalia excess. You're starting to admire Joan's grit, her ability to thrive in this harsh world, much like Sabina's divorce defiance. The night grows colder and you slip away, wondering what dreams Joan holds beyond the next coin, and how she navigates love when the medieval world casts her as both sinner and necessity under its
flickering judgmental stars.
You're seated on a creaky bench in a medieval manor's hall, the air warm with the scent of fresh rushes and the faint musk of wool from women spinning nearby. A fire crackles, casting light on a young girl's flushed face as her mother whispers, advice about her betrothal, their hands busy with embroidery. You're not here to admire their needlework. You're weighing the heavy crown of virginity for medieval women, a prized virtue that shaped their worth in marriage and society, far beyond the church's altar. The village's nighttime hum seeps through the shuttered windows, and you're trying not to snag your sleeve on a spinning wheel while you unravel this delicate burden, hoping you don't look too nosy eavesdropping on their hushed talk. Virginity was a cornerstone of medieval women's value, less about purity and more about family honor and inheritance, much like Rome's betrothal contracts. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 12th century, canon law, as seen in Gratian's Decretum, emphasized virginity for brides, especially among the nobility, to ensure clear paternity for land and titles, akin to Eleanor's dynastic duties. You're picturing a girl like Isabel, her kirtle neatly pinned, her family touting her chaste status to secure a knight's hand. You'd probably fumble a polite nod, muttering about needing a medieval etiquette guide. But Isabel's virginity is a bargaining chip, not a halo, unlike Alina's simpler village vows. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some brides wore crowns of myrtle, a plant tied to the Virgin Mary, during betrothals to flaunt their purity, though they'd sometimes sneak a sprig of rosemary, Alina's love signal, for luck. Picture Isabel balancing hers, praying it stays put during the feast, only for a leaf to fall into her soup. You'd chuckle, imagining it's like a prom tiara with a side of superstition. Historians still argue whether virginity was a rigid demand or flexible ideal, unlike Rome's elite focus. Some say it mattered most for nobles like Eleanor. Others point to village records showing leniency for peasants like Marjorie, if marriage followed. You're not sure, but Isabel's nervous fidgeting suggests she feels the crown's weight. You notice the mother stitching a lily, Mary's symbol, into Isabel's betrothal cloth, a nod to the church's grip we felt in the chapel, stricter than Rome's Venus rites. The humor hits when the mother mutters about keeping suitors at arm's length, like coaching a medieval dodgeball game. Virginity wasn't just personal, it was public, guarded by gossip sharper than Joan, brothel quips or Cicely's adultery risks. Unlike Beatrice's convent bonds, it tied women to family pride, with men like Thomas facing less scrutiny, a double standard echoing Rome's Subura. You spot a small St. Agnes figurine on a shelf, patron of chastity, watching over Isabel like the tapestry's hares watched lovers. The hall's fire dims, and you realize virginity was a medieval woman's shield and shackle, shaping her path from Isabel's betrothal to Alina's love loaf, unlike Rome's bacchanalia freedom. You're starting to see Isabel as more than a symbol, a girl balancing hope and pressure, like Sabina's Roman divorce nerve, but quieter. The spinning wheel's hum softens, and you linger, wondering how Isabel will wear her myrtle crown, and what it costs to carry a village's expectations when love's first step is a vow to stay untouched under the medieval sky's watchful gaze. You're standing in a cramped, rush-strewn chamber off a village manor, the air thick with the scent of burning sage and the sharp tang of sweat, the walls vibrating with a woman's strained breaths. A wooden birthing stool creaks under her. Wait, and midwives murmur prayers, their hands deft with cloths and oils. You're not here to fetch hot water. You're witnessing the sacred trials of childbirth for medieval women, where love and sex culminated in a moment both holy and
harrowing, a test of body and soul.
the village's nighttime hush feels worlds away, and you're trying not to bump into a low beam while you take in this raw intensity, hoping you don't faint at the sight of a bloodied cloth. Childbirth was a defining act for medieval women, a divine duty fraught with danger, tying their lives to the church's will and family survival. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, medical texts like the Trotula advised midwives to use rituals, prayers to St. Margaret, herbal massages, to ease labor, with most births attended by women in homes or manors. You're watching. A midwife anoint the mother, let's call her Hawis, with rose oil, chanting softly as she steadies the stool. You'd probably spill the oil, muttering about needing a medieval first aid kit. But this is life or death work, far from Alina's, festival dances or Eleanor's silk-draped bed, yet bound by the same church we felt in the chapel. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some midwives hung a parchment with St. Bridget's prayer above the birthing stool, believing her saintly labor pains, legend said she birthed painlessly, would protect mother and child. Picture Hawis glancing at it, hoping it's true, while you wonder if it's placebo or miracle. You chuckle, imagining it's like taping a motivational poster to a treadmill, but the stakes are brutal. Many didn't survive, unlike Rome's Juno rites. Historians still argue whether these rituals helped or merely comforted, like Alina's repast. Some say herbs eased pain, others think faith, like St. Anne's shrine prayers, was the real balm. You're not sure, but Hawis's clenched fist suggests she's grasping for both. You notice women gathered around, neighbors and kin, singing a low hymn to the Virgin Mary, their voices a shield against Hawis's cries, much like Beatrice's. Convent whispers, but louder, more urgent. The humor hits when an auntie jokes about the baby inheriting grandpa's big nose, easing the tension, not unlike Paula's Roman taberna quips. Rituals frame this moment. Sage burns to banish.
Evil and a knotted cord, like Marjorie's love knots, circles Hawis's waist for luck.
A boy might get a St. George charm, a girl St. Agnes, tying to Isabel's virginity crown. You recall Joan's brothel life. Here, sex's outcome is legacy, every push a prayer for survival, unlike Rome's Subura trades. The chamber feels smaller as Hawis's labor peaks, the villages spire invisible in the dark beyond. You realize childbirth was a medieval woman's crucible where love became life, echoing Eleanor's dynastic hopes but rawer, more human than Sabina's Roman divorce drama. You're starting to feel Hawis's strength, her body a bridge to the future, defying the church's sin talk and gossip's sting like Marcia's. The midwife's voice rises, urging courage, and you step back, awed by this sacred trial, wondering how many women faced it in such fragile spaces and what it cost to birth love's legacy under the medieval sky. You're seated in a drafty corner of a manor's steward's chamber, the air heavy with the scent of damp parchment and the faint tang of ink drying on a cluttered table. A quill scratches as a clerk records a heated exchange between a woman and her kin, their voices low but sharp, like the crackle of a nearby brazier. You're not here to tally grain yields. You're untangling the rare escape of divorce for medieval women, a path so narrow it was more myth than reality, where love's end meant battling church, family, and village eyes. The village's nighttime hush presses against the shuttered window, and you're trying not to knock over a wax tablet while you follow this tense drama, hoping you don't get caught staring like a nosy scribe. Divorce in medieval Europe was nearly impossible, with the church guarding marriage as a sacred bond, unlike Rome's simpler repudium. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 12th century, canon law, as seen in the decrees of Pope Innocent III, allowed annulments only for rare reasons, like non-consummation or pre-existing vows, with women needing proof and influence to succeed. You're picturing a woman like Agnes, her kirtle worn but neat, arguing her marriage to a drunken miller was invalid, her voice steady despite the clerk's skeptical squint. You'd probably fumble a supportive nod, muttering about needing a medieval lawyer, but Agnes's plea is a long shot, unlike Alina's love-loaf vows or Eleanor's dynastic bed. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women claimed spiritual affinity to annal marriages, arguing a godparent bond with their husband made it unholy, a loophole as creative as Alina's mandrake charm. Picture Agnes spinning this tale, only for the clerk to mishear and scribble spiritual lunacy instead. You'd chuckle, imagining, it's like filing for divorce over a bad horoscope, but the stakes were brutal. Failure meant staying wed or risking exile, worse than Cecily's adultery penance. Historians still argue whether annulments empowered women or were elite privileges, unlike Sabina's Roman split. Some say noble women like Eleanor could pull strings, others point to records showing peasants like Agnes rarely won. You're not sure, but Agnes's clenched jaw suggests she's fighting anyway. You glance at the parchment, its ink detailing Agnes's claim. Her miller never sealed the marriage bed, a bold accusation echoing Isabel's virginity crown but riskier. The humour hits when the clerk mutters about checking the sheets, as if it's a laundry audit, not a life's unravelling. Annulments weren't just legal, they were public, inviting gossip sharper than Joan's brothel quips or Marcia's. Roman rumours, women faced shame even if they won, unlike men like Thomas, who'd remarry with ease, a double standard from Rome's Subura. You recall the church's grip, its St. Margaret prayers for birth. Here, it's a gatekeeper blocking escape unless you're as cunning as Marjorie's market deals or Beatrice's convent poems. The chamber's brazier dims, the village's spire invisible in the dark beyond. You realize divorce was a medieval woman's near-impossible dream, a crack in the church's iron vows, unlike Rome's bacchanalia freedom. You're starting to feel Agnes's resolve, her heart steeled against a miller's slurs and a village's whispers, much like Sabina's divorce nerve, but lonelier. The quill's scratch slows and you lean back, wondering if Agnes will break free or remain bound, and what it costs to seek love's end when the medieval world, from manor to chapel, chains women to forever under its cold, judgmental stars. You're standing in the shadowed grandeur of a feudal castle's great hall, the air heavy with the scent of smoked oak and the faint musk of firs draped over stone benches. Torches sputter, casting flickers on tapestries of lions and lilies, and a lord's voice booms, sealing a betrothal with a clink of goblets. You're not here for the feast. You're confronting the dangerous taboo of incest among medieval noble women, where family ties were knotted too tightly to secure power, echoing Rome's dynastic games but cloaked in chivalric vows. The village's nighttime hush feels far beyond the thick walls, and you're trying not to trip on a wolfhound's tail while you navigate this unsettling web, hoping you don't look as uneasy as you feel. Incest in medieval Europe was forbidden by the church, yet noble families bent rules to keep wealth and titles close, a practice as calculated as Eleanor's marriage bed. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 12th century, canon law, as enforced by the Fourth Lateran Council, banned marriages within 4 degrees of kinship, but dispensations were granted for noble alliances, as seen in the union of Joanna of Navarre to her cousin Philip IV. You're picturing a noblewoman like Matilda, her velvet gown stiff, betrothed to her cousin to unite 2 fiefdoms, her face a mask of duty. You'd probably fumble a courtly bow, muttering about needing a medieval family tree app, but Matilda's marriage is a contract, not love, unlike Alina's love loaf with Thomas. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some noble brides carried twin reliquaries, tiny saintly charms meant to bless the union, even when cousins wed, as if Saint Faith could cleanse the bloodline's tangle. Picture Matilda clutching hers, praying it covers the whispers, only for a clasp to snap mid-ceremony. You chuckle, thinking it's like a wedding favor with too much baggage, much like Isabel's myrtle crown. Historians still argue whether these marriages were pragmatic or scandalous, unlike Rome's open elite unions. Some say they were strategic, like Eleanor's dynastic plays. Others point to church reforms curbing them, with villagers gossiping like Marcia's Roman crowd. You're not sure, but Matilda's rigid poise hints at a heart caught in politics. You notice a tapestry showing a knight and lady, their hands clasped, but the Lord's toast to family strength feels cold, unlike the tapestry's lusty hairs we saw. The humor hits when a page boy trips, spilling ale, his blush mirroring your unease at this cousinly vow, like a less divine Priapus statue. These marriages aimed to secure heirs, like Heweis's childbirth trials, but risked church.
Fines or barrenness, a fear Alina's St. Anne prayers dodged.
Unlike Beatrice's convent bonds, Matilda's love is public, a pawn in feudal chess, echoing Rome's Subura, double standards, but grander. You recall Cecily's adultery risks. Here, the sin's legal, but the whispers sting just as sharp. The hall's torches dim, the village's spire lost in the dark beyond. You realize incest was a noblewoman's gilded trap, binding her to power at the cost of freedom, unlike Rome's bacchanalia revels or Joan's gritty hustle. You're starting to feel Matilda's burden, her heart knotted in a bloodline's chains, much like Sabina's Roman divorce defiance, but lonelier. The goblets clink softer now, and you slip toward a shadowed alcove, wondering how Matilda bears her cousin's ring and what it costs to love a dynasty when the medieval world, from castle to chapel, watches with calculating eyes under its starlit veil. You're strolling through a bustling medieval market, the air sharp with the scent of crushed mint and the smoky tang of a brazier roasting chestnuts nearby. Women in wimples and kirtles weave past, their bronze pins glinting as they barter. For ribbons or fish, their faces a canvas of care and cunning. You're not here to haggle for a loaf, you're stepping into the medieval mirror of beauty, where women crafted their allure to catch eyes or secure status, a game as vital as
any lord's joust.
The village's hum pulses around you, and you're trying not to trip over a stray basket while you decode what made hearts race, hoping you don't look like you just stumbled out of a hayloft. Beauty for medieval women was a crafted art, blending faith, labor, and a touch of defiance against the church's modesty rules. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, texts like the Ancrene Visa advised women to shun vanity, yet courtly literature, such as the Romance of the Rose, praised fair skin, bright eyes, and braided hair as signs of divine favor, much like Eleanor's noble grace. You're eyeing a woman like Sybil, her cheeks dusted with rosewater and chalk, her hair woven into plaits that took an hour's patience. You'd probably smudge your own chalk trying to copy her, muttering about needing a medieval TikTok tutorial. But Sybil's look is a signal, echoing Alina's festival apple pins, but subtler, fit for a manner's gaze. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women used hare's blood as a lip stain, believing its rosy hue mimicked Venus's medieval echo, a charm, riskier than Marjorie's love knots. Picture Sybil dabbing it on, praying no one smells the gamey whiff. You'd chuckle, imagining it's like lipstick with a side of stew, but it was bold in a world of church scrutiny. Historians still argue whether beauty was about seduction or social rank, unlike Rome's lead-based cerusa. Some say it lured suitors like Isabel's myrtle crown, Others think it marked status, separating nobles from Joan's brothel grit. You're not sure, but Sybil's poised tilt of her head suggests she's playing both fields. You pause by a peddler's stall, where Sybil inspects a bone comb, her fingers tracing its teeth, a tool for taming hair into courtly braids, not unlike Beatrice's convent simplicity, but flashier. The humour hits when a gust lifts her wimple, revealing a braid she's still perfecting, like a medieval bad hair day caught mid-fix. Beauty fought the era's grime. Women like Alina used goose fat to soften hands, while nobles like Matilda bathed in wine for glow, echoing Rome's perfume oils. Men like Thomas weren't immune, trimming beards to echo knight's valour, a nod to Quintus' Roman shave. You recall the tapestry's hairs, their lusty wink. Here, beauty's a quieter spell, cast in markets, not cloisters. The market's bustle softens as a bell tolls for vespers, the village's spire casting a long shadow. You realize beauty was a medieval woman's weapon, wielded to spark love or climb ranks, unlike Rome's bacchanalia boldness or Cecily's risky trysts. You're starting to admire Sybil's craft, her chalk-dusted cheeks a silent bid for power, much like Sabina's Roman divorce nerve or Hawis's childbirth strength. The crowd thins and you linger, wondering how Sybil keeps her braids tight in this muddy chaos, and what it takes to shine when the medieval world, from manor to church, measures worth by a mirror's fleeting glow. You're tucked into the smoky nook of a village herbalist's shop, the air thick with the heady mix of crushed violets, myrrh, and a whiff of something earthy simmering in a clay cauldron. Shelves sag under jars of dried petals and oils, their
lids sealed with wax, smudged by eager fingers. You're not here for a salve, you're diving into the medieval craft of seductive scents, where women blended perfumes to draw romantic eyes in a world of mud and sermons.
The village's nighttime hum seeps through the wattle walls, and you're trying not to knock over a fragile vial while you explore this fragrant alchemy, hoping you don't sneeze and ruin the mood. Perfume for medieval women was a subtle spell, enhancing beauty like Sybil's chalk-dusted cheeks, but riskier under the church's gaze. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 13th century, trade records from Venice show noble women importing costly scents like rosewater and ambergris, while peasants used local herbs like lavender, as noted in household accounts, to mimic courtly allure. You're picturing Marjorie, our market widow, dabbing a homemade violet oil behind her ears before a festival, her fingers steady with intent. You'd probably spill the vial, muttering about needing a medieval spray bottle, but Marjorie's scent is a lure echoing Alina's apple pins, but quieter, fit for a village dance or a suitor's glance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women mixed their perfumes with a drop of mare's sweat, believing its musk mimicked primal desire, a secret bolder than Isabel's myrtle crown. Picture Marjorie stirring it in, wrinkling her nose, but hoping it works. You'd chuckle, imagining it's like crafting a love potion with gym socks, but it was serious in a world where priests preached modesty, like those confession rules we overheard. Historians still argue whether scents were for seduction or status, unlike Rome's oyster shell blends. Some say they sparked romance, like Eleanor's noble charm. Others think they marked wealth, separating Marjorie from Joan's brothel grit. You're not sure, but Marjorie's sly smirk as she sniffs her wrist suggests she's aiming for hearts, not just clout. You pick up a small bottle of lavender oil, its scent sharp yet soft, labelled Mary's Grace, a nod to the Virgin's purity, but used for less holy ends like Beatrice's convent bracelets. The herbalist, a wiry woman with stained hands, mutters about its festival night magic, tying it to Alina's dance revels. The humour hits when she warns you not to overdo it, lest you smell like a monk's herb garden gone rogue. Men used scents too. Thomas might have splashed mint water to match his St. Joseph ring, echoing Quintus's Roman cedar oil. You recall Cecily's rosemary signal. Here, perfume's a safer flirt, though the church, unlike Rome's Venus rites, might call it vanity, sniffing sin like Hawiz's childbirth prayers. The shop's glow dims as the cauldron bubbles, and you realize perfume was a medieval woman's whisper, weaving desire into a world of duty, unlike Rome's bacchanalia excess or Sabina's divorce drama. You're starting to admire Marjorie's craft, her violet oil a quiet bid to sway a suitor, much like Flavia's Roman ribbons or Alina's rue paste defiance. The hearth's crackle softens and you set the bottle down, wondering if Marjorie's scent will turn a head at the next feast, and what it takes to bottle love's spark when the medieval world from market to manor watches every waft under its starlit veil. You're weaving through the torchlit bustle of a medieval manor's feast, the air rich with the scent of roasted venison and the sweet tang of mulled wine steaming in pewter cups. Guests in vibrant surcoats and kirtles recline on benches there, laughter mingling with a minstrel's lute strumming a lively tune. You're not here to snag a honeyed fig, you're decoding the subtle cues of medieval women's clothing, where every stitch, fold, and ribbon whispered of love, availability, or restraint in a world of watchful eyes. The village's nighttime hum fades beyond the hall's stone walls, and you're trying not to trip over a trailing cloak while you spot these sartorial signals, hoping you don't end up with a wine stain on your borrowed tunic. Clothing for medieval women was a coded language, balancing the church's modesty rules with the need to allure, much like Sybil's market beauty tricks. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, sumptuary laws like those in England's statutes of 1363 restricted women's dress by class, but courtly records show noblewomen wore fitted kirtles or sideless surcoats to hint at curves, while peasants used simpler shifts with strategic lacing. You're watching a woman like Gillian, her kirtle laced loosely at the side, to catch a squire's eye, a move bolder than Alina's festival apple pins. You'd probably tangle your own laces trying to copy her, muttering about needing a medieval stylist. But Gillian's outfit speaks, echoing Eleanor's noble elegance, but earthier, fit for a feast's flirtations. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women pinned brooches shaped like hearts or doves low on their bodices, a signal of openness to courtship, as subtle as Marjorie's violet oil. Picture Gillian adjusting hers, only for it to slip and jab her. Ouch! You'd chuckle, imagining it's like a flirty badge that fights back, unlike Rome's Herculean knots. Historians still argue whether these clothing cues were personal choice or social pressure, unlike Rome's toga games. Some say they gave women agency, like Isabel's myrtle crown. Others think church and class rules, like those confession mandates, dictated every pin, unlike Joan's defiant yellow hood. You're not sure, but Gillian's sly glance at the squire suggests she's bending the rules tonight. You notice a merchant's wife across the hall, her wimple loosened to show. A braid, a nod to courtly romance less chaste than Beatrice's convent veil. The humour hits when a young lad's surcoat catches on a bench, revealing patched hose, his nightly dreams dashed by bad tailoring, like Thomas's St. Joseph ring slip. Clothing marked status too. Widows like Agnes wore sombre veils, signalling retreat, while feast-goers like Gillian chose bright dyes to shine, echoing Alina's festival revels. You recalled Cecily's rosemary signal. Here, a dove brooch is safer, though gossip, sharper than Marcia's Roman barbs, could twist it into scandal. Men's tight hose like the squires played the game too, a nod to chivalric vigour, much like Quintus's Roman toga. The feast's warmth wraps around you, the minstrel's lute slowing to a ballad, and you realise clothing was a medieval woman's silent script, weaving desire into a world of vows and veils, unlike Rome's Bacchanalia boldness or Sabina's divorce drama. You're starting to admire Gillian's finesse, her laced kirtle, a quiet bid for love, like Flavia's Roman ribbons or Hawis's childbirth strength. The torches flicker, and you linger, wondering how Gillian's dove brooch will shift the night's tale, and what it takes to signal desire when the medieval world, from manor to church, reads every thread under its starlit scrutiny. You're swaying in the glow of a medieval manor's courtyard, the air warm with the scent of crushed grass and the sweet tang of cider wafting from wooden mugs. A bonfire crackles, casting shadows on couples twirling to the reedy hum of pipes, and the beat of a tabor, their kirtles and tunics swirling like petals in a breeze. You're not here to sip the brew, you're caught in the dance of courtly love, where medieval women used movement to spark romance, weaving desire into every step under the watchful eyes of lords and gossips. The village's nighttime hush fades beyond the torchlit circle, and you're trying not to trip over a root while you join this rhythmic flirtation, hoping you don't flail like a startled sheep. Dance was a medieval woman's stage, blending chivalry's grace with the church's cautious nod, a subtler seduction than Alina's festival apple pins. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 13th century, courtly texts like Le Roman de la Rose describe dances like the carol, where women led chains of steps, their glances and touches signalling interest, often at feasts or May Day revels. You're watching a woman like Cecily, not our adulteress, but a namesake, her kirtle swaying as she guides a knight through a turn, her smile bold yet veiled. You'd probably step on your own hem, muttering about needing a medieval Zumba class, but Cecily's dance, like Gillian's dove brooch, is a coded invitation, echoing Eleanor's noble poise but livelier, fit for a firelit night. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women tucked a sprig of rue into their hair during dances, believing its bitter scent warded off unwanted suitors, a charm as sly as Marjorie's violet oil. Picture Cecily pinning hers only, for it to slip mid-spin, landing in a squire's mug. You'd chuckle, imagining it's like a vegan garnish gone rogue, unlike Rome's ribbon tosses. Historians still argue whether these dances were empowering or performative, unlike Rome's Bacchanalia frenzy. Some say they gave women like Alina agency to choose. Others think church oversight, like those confession rules, kept steps chaste, unlike Joan's brothel swagger. You're not sure, but Cecily's deft sidestep of a clumsy lord suggests she's choreographing her own fate. You weave closer to the fire, where dancers form a circle, hands linked, their laughter sharp as Cecily's eyes catch her knights, a moment as potent as Beatrice's convent glances, but bolder. The humour hits when a tipsy youth stumbles, nearly toppling the chain, his blush rivaling Thomas's St. Joseph ring fumble. Men danced too, like the knight's gallant bow, echoing Quintus's Roman toga flare. But women led here, their steps a spell, much like the tapestry's hairs we saw, though less lusty, more lyrical. You recall Hawis's childbirth hymns. Here, the music's secular, yet the church's St. Anne prayers linger, tempering passion with piety, unlike Rome's Priapus winks. The pipes soften, and Cecily pauses, her breath visible in the cool air.
a rue sprig still tucked defiantly in her braid. You realize dance was a medieval woman's fleeting freedom, a chance to weave love's story, like Sabina's Roman divorce nerve or Isabel's myrtle crown, but lighter, spun in firelight.
The bonfire's glow dims, the village's spire dark beyond, and you're starting to feel Cecily's spark, her dance a quiet rebellion against duty's weight, like Flavia's market wit. You linger, cider mug forgotten, wondering what hearts her steps will sway, and how women danced desire's tune in the medieval night's fleeting, starlit embrace. You're leaning against a weathered oak in a medieval village square, the air crisp with the scent of damp earth and the faint whiff of barley stew simmering in nearby cottages. Women gather by a well, their kirtles splashed with mud as they scrub linens, their voices low but sharp, trading tales of a neighbour's too cosy chat with a peddler. You're not here to fetch water, you're catching the cruel blade of gossip, where rumours about medieval women's love and sex could cut deeper than a reaper's scythe, shaping reputations in a world of prying eyes. The village's nighttime hum settles around you, and you're trying not to slip on wet cobbles while you eavesdrop, hoping you don't get pegged as the nosy outsider. Gossip was a medieval woman's shadow, a social whip that policed desire under the church's gaze, much like Marcia's Roman whispers. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, manorial court rolls like those from Hale Samhain show women fined for slander over sexual rumours, with accusations of affairs or loose morals sparking public shaming or penance. You're picturing a baker like Ellen, her hands floured, dodging whispers about a late-night visit from a tanner, her face hot with defiance. You'd probably trip over a bucket trying to defend her, muttering about medieval cancel culture. But gossip wasn't idle. It could ruin marriages or dowries, worse than Cecily's adultery risks or Joan's brothel stigma. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some gossips left coded marks like a chalked crescent moon on a door to hint at a woman's wandering heart, as subtle as Gillian's dove brooch. Imagine Ellen scrubbing one off, cursing the artist's nerve. You'd chuckle, thinking it's like a medieval Yelp review gone rogue, unlike Rome's graffiti hearts. Historians still argue whether gossip was a community check or a gendered weapon, unlike Rome's Subura chatter. Some say it kept order, like Alina's love loaf vows. Others think it targeted women like Marjorie, amplifying slips into scandals, unlike Thomas's lighter scrutiny. You're not sure, but Ellen's tight lips suggest she's bracing for the village's tongue. You overhear a woman at the well mock a rival's festival dance, maybe Cecily's rue-sprigged twirl, linking it to a rumoured tryst, her tone as biting as Agnes's annulment plea. The humour hits when another quips about the tanner's yeasty charm, a jab sharp enough to rival Flavia's Roman market wit. Gossip wasn't just women's work. Men like Thomas spread tales too, perhaps to deflect from their St. Joseph ring fumbles, but women bore the brunt, like Isabel's virginity crown or Hawiss's childbirth trials. You recall Beatrice's convent whispers. Here they're louder, public, weaving Ellen's life into a web stickier than Alina's rue paste. A small St. Mary statue by the well watches a nod to the church's grip, sterner than Rome's Venus. The square grows quiet as the women disperse, the village's spire dark against the stars. You realize gossip was a medieval woman's unseen judge, shaping her love's path, unlike Rome's bacchanalia freedom or Sabina's divorce nerve. You're starting to feel Ellen's sting, her heart caught in whispers as harsh as the church's penance, much like Joan's yellow hood defiance. The well's ripple softens and you linger, wondering how many secrets fueled these tales and what it took to stand tall when the medieval world from market to manor, wielded rumour like a blade under its firelit, star-streaked sky. You're sprawled on a worn blanket in a medieval village's orchard, the air sweet with the scent of ripe apples and the faint buzz of bees circling fallen fruit. A group of girls giggle nearby, braiding daisies into each other's hair, while an older sister spins tales of knights and lovers under a gnarled tree. You're not here to pick fruit. You're uncovering how medieval girls were taught about love, sex, and the tangled path to womanhood through stories, chores, and whispered warnings. The village's evening hum drifts from the square, and you're trying not to snag your tunic on a branch while you soak in these lessons, hoping you don't look too obvious, eavesdropping on their chatter. Medieval girls learned love's rules, not in classrooms but through life's daily weave, preparing them for roles as wives or nuns. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 13th century, conduct books like The Book of the Knight of the Tower advised noble girls on modesty and courtship, while peasant mothers, as seen in court records, taught practical marriage skills through tasks like spinning. You're picturing a girl like Maud, all elbows and curiosity, listening as her sister explains how to charm a suitor without sparking Ellen's gossip. You'd probably fumble a daisy braid trying to join in, muttering about needing a medieval dating coach, but Maud's lessons, like Isabel's virginity crown, shape her future, unlike Alina's festival revels. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some mothers gave girls tiny spindle whorls carved with hearts, a charm to spin a good husband, as subtle as Gillian's dove brooch. Picture Maud clutching hers, only to drop it in the dirt mid-lesson. You'd chuckle, imagining it's like a lucky keychain that rolls under the couch, unlike Rome's Venus amulets. Historians still argue whether these teachings empowered girls or locked them into roles, unlike Rome's Ovid recitals. Some say they gave agency, like Marjorie's market clout. Others think they enforced duty, like the Church's St. Anne prayers, stricter than Beatrice's convent bonds. You're not sure, but Maud's wide eyes suggest she's soaking up every word, heart and all. You notice the sister weave a tale of a lady and her knight, much like the tapestry's courtly lovers, but with a warning about wandering hearts, a nod to Cecily's adultery risks. The humour hits when Maud asks if knights really kiss like in songs, earning a playful swat, like Thomas's tavern blush over his St. Joseph ring. Girls learned from life too, watching Alina's Love. Lofau's or Joan's Brothel Defiance taught more than any book, like Vibia's Roman lessons. Mothers like Hawis might gift a St. Agnes charm, tying to Isabel's myrtle crown, while village dances like Cecily's rue-sprigged steps hinted at love's spark, far from Agnes's annulment woes. You spot a heart scratched into the tree, bark, maybe Maud's crush, echoing Gaius's Roman graffiti. The orchard's glow fades as dusk settles, the village's spire a silhouette against the sky. You realize these lessons were a medieval girl's map, guiding her through love's maze, unlike Rome's Bacchanalia excess or Sabina's divorce drama. You're starting to admire Maud's curiosity, her heart poised between tales and truths, like Flavia's market wit or Hawis's childbirth strength. The bees' hum softens and you linger, wondering what lessons Maud will carry to her own love story and how girls learn to navigate desire under the medieval world's watchful, starlit gaze where every whisper held a warning and a wish. You're perched on a creaky stool in a medieval scriptorium, the air heavy with the scent of vellum and the sharp tang of oak gall ink drying on a slanted desk. Candlelight flickers, casting shadows on shelves stuffed with manuscripts. There, pages alive with curling vines and lovers' glances, inked in crimson and gold. You're not here to practice your quill work. You're studying the secret passions of medieval women, hidden in illuminated manuscripts where their desires glow, in margins and miniatures defying the church's stern gaze. The village's nighttime hush seeps through a high window, and you're trying not to smudge a page while you decode these inked intimacies, hoping you don't look too clumsy flipping through a priceless codex. Manuscripts were medieval women's, quiet canvases where scribes, sometimes women themselves, wove love's whispers into sacred texts, much like the tapestry's hairs we saw. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, books of hours, like those commissioned by noblewomen in France, often included marginal images of courtly lovers or playful couples, blending devotion with desire, as seen in the Hours of Jeanne d'Evreux. You're tracing a miniature of a lady and knight, sharing a rose, their hands brushing in a way that feels too tender for prayer. You'd probably blot the ink trying to sketch it, muttering about needing a medieval art app. But this art, like Gillian's dove brooch, speaks of passion, echoing Eleanor's noble allure but softer, fit for a nun's quiet hours. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some margins hid drolleries, cheeky figures like kissing monkeys or dancing maids, mocking loves, folly, a nod to desire's mischief, as bold as Alina's rue-sprigged dance. Picture spotting a monkey stealing a heart, grinning like it knows the gossip. You'd chuckle, imagining it's a medieval meme slipped past the abbot, unlike Rome's Cupid statues. Historians still argue whether these images were subversive or decorative, unlike Rome's explicit frescoes. Some say they voiced women's yearnings like Beatrice's convent bracelets. Others think they were playful distractions controlled by church patrons, stricter than Marjorie's love knots. You're not sure, but the lady's sly smile in the miniature hints at a heart unbound by psalms. You turn a page, revealing a nun reading to a lady, their eyes locked over the book, a scene as intimate as Cecily's festival twirl, but cloaked in piety. The humour hits when a drollery shows a cat chasing a yarn ball, as if mocking the scriptorium's solemnity, like Thomas's tavern fumble. These manuscripts weren't just noble treasures. Village women like Alina saw simpler versions in church missals, their hearts stirred by inked lovers, much like Maud's orchard tales. You recall Joan's brothel rose or Haweis's childbirth hymns. Here, passion's quieter, inked in margins. A safer rebellion than Agnes's annulment plea or Ellen's gossip woes, yet no less human, unlike Rome's Subura trades. The scriptorium's candles gutter, the village's spire invisible in the dark beyond. You realize these manuscripts were medieval women's hidden songs, tracing love's pulse in a world of vows and veils, like Sabina's Roman divorce nerve or Flavia's market wit, but etched in ink. You're starting to feel the scribes, daring, their quills dancing with desires that outlasted time, much like Isabel's myrtle crown. The vellum's rustle softens and you linger, wondering what other passions these pages hold, and how women inked their hearts into eternity when the medieval world, from manor to cloister, bound love under its starlit, watchful gaze. You're hunched over a cluttered table in a medieval healer's hut, the air thick with the scent of crushed sage and the bitter whiff of something bubbling in a cauldron, like a stew gone rogue. Shelves sag under jars of dried nettles, poppy, seeds and murky oils, their labels faded from years of sweaty hands. You're not here for a twisted ankle. You're mixing cures for medieval women's romantic woes, from lovesick hearts to bedroom blues, in a world where love's aches were treated with herbs and hope. The village's nighttime hush wraps the wattle walls. And you're trying not to spill a gritty tincture while you explore these remedies, hoping you don't end up smelling like a failed apothecary. Medieval women sought healers for love's ailments, blending church-sanctioned medicine with whispered law, a defiance softer than Alina's rue paste. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 13th century, texts like the Trotula prescribed herbal tonics, rosewater for heartache, fennel for fertility, for women's emotional and sexual health, often dispensed by midwives or wise women. You're picturing a weaver like Joan, not our brothel Joan, but a namesake, begging a cure for her pining over a wayward suitor, her hands clutching a vial of lavender syrup. You'd probably sneeze mid-mix, muttering about needing a medieval WebMD, but this was serious. Love's pain, like Heweis's childbirth trials, was a wound, and healers were women's allies, unlike the church's confession stool. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cures use dove's feathers, boiled with honey to lighten a heavy heart, because doves, like Gillian's brooch, symbolized love's flight. Picture Joan sipping this, wincing at the feathery grit, hoping her suitor returns. You'd chuckle, imagining it's like chugging a smoothie with a side of pillow stuffing, unlike Rome's sparrow tongues. Historians still argue whether these remedies worked or were placebos, unlike Rome's myrtle brews. Some say herbs like fennel boosted mood, others think faith. Like St. Margaret's childbirth prayers was the cure stricter than Beatrice's convent bonds. You're not sure, but Joan's earnest gulp suggests she's betting on the doves. You pick up a jar of nettle tea labelled for cooling ardour, a fix for unrequited love, or perhaps a suitor, too eager, like Cecily's festival night. The healer, a stooped woman with ink-stained fingers, hums a charm, tying her work to the church's St. Anne's shrine, though her wink echoes Marjorie's market slyness. The humour hits when she warns you not to mix it with ale, lest you douse the wrong fire, like a medieval bartender's quip. Women also sought tonics for fertility, or ease in marriage beds, like Alina's rue paste, or Eleanor's noble girdle bells, far from Agnes's annulment woes. You notice a carved St. Valentine figurine on a shelf, a nod to love's patron, winking at Thomas's St. Joseph ring, unlike Rome's Priapus grins. The hut's glow dims as the cauldron simmers, and you realize these cures were medieval women's. Lifelines soothing love's chaos in a world of duty, like Sabina's Roman divorce nerve or Flavia's market wit, but earthier, steeped in herbs. You're starting to admire Joan's hope, her lavender syrup a quiet plea for joy, like Isabel's myrtle crown or Ellen's gossip defiance. The hearth's crackle softens and you set the jar down, wondering if Joan's doves will mend her heart, and what it takes to heal love's sting when the medieval world, from village to manor, binds women's desires under its starlit, watchful veil. You're resting on a sagging bench in a medieval village's communal bakehouse, the air warm with the scent of fresh rye loaves and the faint must of flour dust settling on worn timbers. An elder woman, her face lined like a well-read psalter, kneads dough with hands steady as oak, sharing a tale of her long-ago courtship with a younger baker nearby. You're not here to snag a crust. You're exploring how aging shaped medieval women's desire, where love flickered on despite grey hairs and aching joints, in a world that prized youth but honoured wisdom. The village's nighttime hush seeps through the open door, and you're trying not to knock over a flour sack while you soak in her quiet strength, hoping you don't look too nosy, listening to her reminisce. Aging didn't quench medieval women's passion, though it shifted their roles in love's dance, from Alina's festival twirls to a slower, deeper rhythm. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, widowhood records, like those from York's Guild Rolls, show older women remarrying or advising younger kin on love, their experience valued in a society needing heirs and harmony, much like
Eleanor's noble influence. You're picturing this baker, let's call her Edith, her wimple streaked with flour, teasing her friend about a new suitor's creaky knees.
You'd probably fumble a compliment tripping over your old French, but Edith's spark, like Marjorie's market clout, shows desire endured, unlike Isabel's myrtle crown youth. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some older women wore brooches shaped like ivy, symbolizing evergreen love, pinned to kirtles to signal they were still open to romance, a charm subtler than Gillian's dove brooch. Picture Edith pinning hers, chuckling when it snags her sleeve. You'd smile, imagining it's like a silver-haired Tinder profile, unlike Rome's Venus amulets. Historians still argue whether aging freed women to love or sidelined them, unlike Rome's elder couples. Some say widowhood gave autonomy, like Agnes's annulment fight. Others think youth, like Maud's orchard lessons, trumped age, with gossip as sharp as Ellen's stinging. You're not sure, but Edith's sly grin suggests she's not done with love's game. You notice Edith's hands, knotted but deft, shaping a loaf with care, her kirtle looser, but dyed a warm saffron, echoing Sybil's market allure but softer, less showy than Joan's yellow hood. The humour hits when she jabs at her friend's suitor, calling him older than St. Augustine's sermons, her wit as sharp as Flavia's Roman quips. Older women weren't just grandmothers, they were matchmakers like Marjorie, or healers like Joan's lavender syrup maker, guiding girls like Maud, or soothing Heweis's childbirth fears. You recall Beatrice's convent bonds. Here, loves, public, woven into village life, a steadier flame than Cecily's adulterous risks, unlike Rome's bacchanalia revels. The bakehouse's glow dims as the fire settles, the village's spire dark beyond the door. You realize aging for medieval women didn't douse desire, it deepened it, like the manuscript's inked lovers, tying love to legacy, unlike Sabina's Roman divorce drama. You're starting to feel Edith's resilience, her heart kindled by memories and new hopes, much like Thomas's St. Joseph ring or Alina's love loaf vows. The oven's warmth fades and you linger, wondering how Edith keeps her ivy brooch shining in this hard-won life, and what it means to love when the medieval world, from market to manor, counts years like grains under its starlit, watchful sky. You're perched on a wobbly stool in a medieval port tavern, the air thick with the briny scent of the nearby river, and the sharp tang of sour wine spilled on scarred oak tables. The crowd's a patchwork. Local fishers, swarthy Genoese traders, a veiled Norsewoman bartering furs, their voices clashing like waves over mugs of mead and ale. You're not here for the watery stew. You're comparing how foreign women's views on love and sex brushed against the medieval tapestry. There, ways mingling or clashing with the village's norms, much like Rome's portside tavern tales. The village's nighttime hum fades under the creak of ships, and you're trying not to knock over your cup while you catch these cross-cultural whispers, hoping you don't get roped into a sailor's tall tale. Foreign women brought their own scripts of desire to medieval Europe, reshaping or challenging the church's grip we felt in Alina's Confessions. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 13th century, trade records from Bruges show merchant wives from Byzantium or Al-Andalus managing dowries with more autonomy than local women, their marriage customs influencing manor courts, as seen in cross-border betrothals. You're picturing a Moorish trader's wife, Zara, her silk veil shimmering, negotiating a match with a local knight, Her terms bolder than Marjorie's market deals. You'd probably mangle a greeting in Arabic, earning a polite smile. But Zara's confidence, like Flavia's Roman swagger, shows foreign women could bend local love rules, unlike Eleanor's feudal vows. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Norse women wore silver amulets shaped like Freya's cats, believed to spark passion, a charm as bold as Gillian's dove brooch, but wilder, startling villagers used to Sybil's chalked cheeks. Picture Zara mistaking a wimple for a headscarf, offering a cat charm to a shocked matron. You'd chuckle, thinking it's like gifting a punk pin to a nun, unlike Rome's Venus pendants. Historians still argue whether foreign ways liberated local women or sparked suspicion, unlike Rome's melting pot. Some say they broadened love's norms like Beatrice's convent bonds. Others think church and gossip, like Ellen's Wellside Barbs, branded them suspect, stricter than Joan's Yellow Hood. You're not sure, but Zara's steady gaze suggests she's unfazed by the stares. You overhear a Genoese sailor describe a betrothal feast in Sicily, where women danced with bells on their ankles, less chaste than Cecily's rue-sprigged carol, but thrilling to locals, like Alina's festival revels. The humour hits when he mimics the jingle, sloshing his ale, much like Thomas's tavern fumble with his St. Joseph ring. Foreigners brought gods too, Freya's lusty spark or Islamic poetry's romance, but the church's St. Anne prayers, like Haweis's childbirth rites, held sway, tempering exotic allure, unlike Rome's Priapus winks. You notice a carved Mary Pendon by the bar, a local anchor amid this sea of strangers, tying to Isabel's myrtle crown or Maud's orchard lessons. The tavern's din softens as a lute strums, the river's glint flickering through a cracked shutter. You realize foreign women's ways, from Zara's silk to Norse cat charms, wove new threads into medieval love, like the manuscript's lovers, yet faced the church's loom, unlike Rome's Bacchanalia excess or Sabina's divorce drama. You're starting to admire Zara's poise, her heart navigating alien shores, like Joan's brothel grit or Edith's ivy brooch. The crowd thins and you linger, wondering how Zara balances her homeland's fire with village frost and what tales she'll carry beyond the medieval tide under its starlit, watchful sky. You're standing in the dim chill of a medieval churchyard, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and the faint trace of frankincense lingering from a recent burial. Moonlight filters through yew trees, casting shadows on weathered stone, and small offerings tucked beside graves, rings, ribbons, a chipped clay heart. You're not here to pay respects, you're uncovering the grave goods of love, where medieval women's romances were etched into tokens left for eternity, whispering
of devotion beyond the church's reach.
The village's nighttime hush wraps the silent yard, and you're trying not to trip on a root while you trace these tender relics, hoping you don't disturb the peace of those who loved here. Burial goods in medieval Europe were more than mementos. They carried women's hearts into the afterlife, much like the manuscript's inked lovers we saw. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, archaeological finds like those from York cemeteries show graves with personal items, lockets, braided cords or paired rings, often placed by widows or kin to honour bonds, echoing Eleanor's dynastic legacy. You're holding a small bronze clasp, shaped like clasped hands, perhaps left by a widower for a wife like Edith, our ivy-broached baker. You'd probably fumble it, heart catching at its weight, but it's a vow for eternity, like Alina's. Love loaf or Marjorie's market love knots, softer than Rome's tomb figurines. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some graves held dried rose petals, tied in linen, believed to keep lovers' sense alive in paradise, a charm as delicate as Zara's. Freya cat amulet. Picture a mourner tucking them beside a beloved, hoping heaven smells of summer. You'd smile, thinking it's like slipping a love letter into a cosmic mailbox, unlike Rome's perfume vials. Historians still argue whether these goods were sentimental or practical for the afterlife, unlike Rome's Priapus charms. Some say they tied survivors to the lost, like Beatrice's convent bracelets. Others think they ensured divine favor, like Hawiz's St. Bridget prayer, stricter than Joan's brothel pendant. You're not sure, but the clasp's worn edges feel like a whisper of forever. You notice a stone carved with two doves, their beaks touching, a symbol of love as potent as the tapestry's hairs, but holier, like Gillian's dove brooch or Maud's orchard heart. The humor hits when you spot a tiny snail etched nearby, as if even it's mourning at its own pace, like Thomas's St. Joseph ring slip. These tokens weren't just for nobles. Village women like Cecily or Ellen left simpler. Cords or beads, their love as real as Isabel's myrtle crown, defying Agnes's annulment scars or Ellen's gossip sting. You recall Sybil's chalked cheeks or Zara's silk veil. Here, love's stripped to its essence, inked in earth, a quieter rebellion than Alina's rue paste or Rome's bacchanalia revels. The churchyard's silence deepens, the village's spire a faint outline under the stars. You realize these grave goods were medieval women's final songs, binding love to eternity, like Sabina's Roman divorce nerve or Flavia's market wit, but carved in stone and petal. You're starting to feel their weight, the way they anchor. Edith's ivy spark or Joan's gritty heart to something timeless beyond the church's gaze. The moonlight fades and you linger, wondering what other loves these graves hold, and how women ensured their hearts echoed when the medieval world, from manor to tavern, fell silent under its starlit eternal veil. You're reclining on a grassy hill overlooking the medieval village, the air cool with the scent of dew and the faint smoke of hearth fires curling into a sky blazing with stars. The church spire pierces the horizon, a silent sentinel over cottages, where Alina, Edith, and Joan dream, their loves woven into the night's quiet tapestry. You're not just stargazing, you're reflecting on the legacy of women's love in medieval times. A thread that binds manor, market, and grave, outlasting the church's rules and village whispers. The village's pulse hums softly below, and you're sinking into the grass, letting these stories settle like embers, wondering how they shaped hearts under this eternal sky. Women's love in medieval Europe wasn't just a fleeting spark. It was a force shaping lives from Maud's orchard tales to Matilda's dynastic vows, as vital as the harvest. A mainstream fact grounds us. By the 14th century, chronicles like Froissart's note women's roles in courtly love inspired poetry and politics, their desires rippling through society, from Eleanor's Solar to Alina's love loaf. You're picturing Marjorie, her violet oil still sweet, smiling at a suitor under this same sky, her heart echoing Sybil's chalked allure. You'd probably sigh wishing for their courage, but their love, like the manuscript's inked roses, lives in the village's rhythm, unlike Rome's bacchanalia excess. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women believed shooting stars were lovers, souls reunited in heaven, guiding earthly hearts, a charm as tender as Edith's ivy brooch. Imagine Joan, not our brothel Joan, gazing up, hoping her lavender syrup worked, seeing a streak and smiling. You'd chuckle, thinking it's like a cosmic DM from a crush, unlike Rome's starry myths. Historians still argue whether medieval women's love was unique or mirrored other eras, like Sabina's Roman divorce drama. Some say the church's grip made it distinct like St. Anne's prayers. Others think its human pulse, from Zara's Freya amulet to Gillian's dove brooch,
Was universal like Flavia's market wit.
You're not sure, but the star's glow feels like it holds every story we've met. You trace the constellations, recalling moments, Alina's rue-sprig dance, Ellen's gossip scars, the clasped hands in Edith's grave. The humour hits. One last time as you picture Thomas, our blacksmith, tripping over his St. Joseph ring, still wooing Alina under these stars, like Gaius's Roman love curse. Love was medieval women's tapestry, woven with duty, defiance, and dreams, from Cecily's adulterous risks to Hawiss's childbirth hymns, as bold as Isabel's myrtle crown or Beatrice's convent whispers. It drove charms, dances, even nettle teas, each a stitch, in a world where Joan's yellow hood and Maud's heart whirl spun stories brighter than the church's candles, unlike Rome's Subura trades. As the night deepens, the stars soften their light, a gentle cradle over the village's sleeping roofs. You're safe here, wrapped in tales of women who loved against odds, their hearts a quiet fire that warms you still. The hill's breeze slows, carrying the village's hum into a soothing murmur, and your thoughts drift heavy with their courage. Let the grass hold you, let the stars watch you, and let these loves, Alina's, Marjorie's, Edith's, whisper you into peace. Close your eyes, breathe deep, and sink into the dark, where medieval women's hearts sing on, guiding dreams as endless as the sky's starlit, timeless embrace.